Twin boys vanished on cruise ship. 10 months later, a suitcase washes up on shore. The sea never gives up its secrets willingly. Dawn broke over Pelican Beach, painting the horizon in watercolors of amber and rose as Martin Kessler dragged his metal detector across the wet sand. 67 years old with salt and pepper stubble and eyes that had seen 40 years at sea, Martin wasn't searching for buried treasure, just the occasional lost watch or ring to supplement his pension. But on this particular morning, as gulls circled overhead like portents, it wasn't his detector that signaled discovery. Rather, it was the dark shape tumbling in the gentle surf, a vintage Samsonite hardshell suitcase, its one-screen exterior now stained and barnacled from months adrift. "Probably just garbage," he muttered, approaching with the wariness of a man who'd learned the ocean's gifts often came with unexpected costs. The case was sealed with rusted latches and wrapped partially in waterlogged duct tape. Something about its appearance sent a chill through Martin despite the warming morning air. With hesitant fingers, he pried at the corroded metal, feeling resistance before the first latch gave way with a sound like a distant gunshot. The second latch proved more stubborn, requiring Martin to leverage his pocket knife before it finally surrendered. He paused, suddenly reluctant to reveal the contents, a peculiar dread washing over him. The beach remained deserted save for a jogger in the distance, no witnesses to whatever revelation awaited. When Martin finally lifted the lid, his weathered face drained of all color. The suitcase wasn't filled with sodden clothing or waterlogged papers as he had expected. Instead, it contained a carefully preserved collection of items: 2 identical blue baseball caps with Disney logos, a waterproof camera in a sealed bag, and a child's journal protected in plastic. But what caused his gnarled hands to tremble was the framed photograph centered among these belongings, twin boys with identical grins standing on a cruise ship deck, their arms draped around each other's shoulders. Scrawled across the bottom in red marker were 3 chilling words: "We know everything." Martin's discovery that morning would resurrect a 10-month-old mystery that had captivated the nation, unraveling a web of deception that began on a summer day when the Aurora Majesty set sail from Miami with 3,214 passengers aboard, including the Winters family, whose vacation would end with an emptiness no parent should ever endure. 10 months earlier, Louise Winters stood at the ship's railing, watching Miami's skyline recede into the distance. At 54, with her auburn hair cut in a stylish bob that framed a face lined with both laughter and worry, she embodied the weariness and anticipation of a mother who had finally permitted herself a vacation. Beside her, Robert Winters scrolled through his phone, his silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the device's glow as he frowned at work emails he'd promised not to check. "You're doing it again," Louise said, nudging her husband with a gentle elbow to his ribs. "You promised the boys no work for 7 days." Robert sighed, slipping the phone into the pocket of his linen shorts. At 56, with salt and pepper hair and the perpetually tense shoulders of a man who carried his stress like armor, he'd built a successful accounting firm that demanded his constant attention. "Old habits," he offered with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Where are the boys anyway?" Louise scanned the crowded deck. "They were right behind us a minute ago." A flicker of concern crossed her features before she dismissed it with a shake of her head. "Probably ran off to explore. You know how they are, can't keep them still for more than 5 minutes. "Noah, Ethan," Robert called, his voice carrying over the hum of excitement that permeated the ship's departure. When no response came, he shrugged. "They're 12 now, Lou. We can't keep them tethered. They've got those matching watches with the ship's map on them." Louise nodded, though unease lingered in her eyes. The twins had always been adventurous, independent beyond their years, and sometimes eerily synchronized in their thoughts and actions. Born just 7 minutes apart, Noah and Ethan shared not only identical appearances, with wheat-blonde hair and hazel eyes that changed color in different lights, but also the secret language and intuitive connection that often developed between twins. "You're right," she conceded, forcing her shoulders to relax. "I just can't help remembering what happened at Disney last year." Robert laughed, the sound warming the space between them. "When they decided to ride Space Mountain alone and ended up lost for 45 minutes, they're smarter now. They learned their lesson." As the ship's horn bellowed a farewell to the mainland, a voice cut through the ambient noise. "Mrs. Winters, Mr. Winters." They turned to see Carmen Rodriguez, a ship attendant whose crimson uniform jacket complemented her dark complexion and warm smile. At 32, Carmen had worked the Caribbean cruise circuit for nearly a decade, her expertise evident in her confident stride and attentive demeanor. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I noticed your boys heading toward the arcade level. They seemed very excited about the virtual reality simulators." Relief washed over Louise's face. "Thank you, Carmen, I was just starting to worry." "It's my job to notice things," Carmen replied with a wink. "First cruise with the Aurora Majesty." Robert nodded. "First cruise ever, actually. The boys have been begging for years." "Well, you're in for a treat. 7 days of paradise." Carmen's smile dimmed slightly as she glanced at her watch. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask. I'm assigned to your section for the duration of the voyage." With a polite nod, she moved on to greet other passengers. "See," Robert wrapped an arm around Louise's shoulders. "Nothing to worry about. Let's grab some drinks and check out our suite. The boys will find us when they get hungry." Louise allowed herself to be guided toward the ship's interior, unaware that this moment, this ordinary exchange on an extraordinary day, would soon be scrutinized by detectives, dissected in news reports, and revisited in her nightmares for months to come. Because in 4 hours, as the Aurora Majesty cleaved through the turquoise waters of the Caribbean Sea, Noah and Ethan Winters would vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions, and the beginning of a mystery that would consume lives far beyond the confines of the massive cruise liner. The Winters suite exceeded their expectations, a spacious accommodation with a private balcony overlooking the endless blue expanse of the Atlantic. Louise ran her fingers along the polished mahogany desk while Robert tested the firmness of the queen-sized bed. "The boys will love their room," Louise said, peering through the connecting door to the smaller cabin with twin beds dressed in crisp white linens. She placed the twins' matching blue backpacks on their respective beds, Noah's with a small tear in the side pocket, Ethan's with a NASA patch sewn onto the front. Robert checked his watch, a 60th birthday gift from his father who had passed away the previous winter. "It's almost 4. Should we go find them for the safety drill?" "They know to be back by then," Louise replied, though she couldn't suppress the flutter of concern that had become her constant companion since the twins were born prematurely 12 years ago, each weighing barely 5 pounds. Despite their rocky start, they had grown into healthy, vibrant boys whose identical appearances masked distinctly different personalities. Noah the cautious planner, Ethan the impulsive dreamer. The mandatory safety drill began at 4:30 p.m., the alarm sending passengers streaming toward their designated muster stations. Louise and Robert stood at Station C, life jackets secured over their resort wear, scanning the crowd for 2 blonde heads. "I don't see them," Louise whispered, rising onto her tiptoes despite her considerable height. "Robert, I don't see them." Robert's expression remained calm, but his eyes betrayed his growing concern. "They probably went to the wrong station. You know how they mix up letters sometimes." As the cruise director's voice boomed through the speakers, explaining evacuation procedures neither of them were absorbing, Louise's anxiety crystallized into something sharper. When the drill concluded 20 minutes later with still no sign of the twins, Robert's facade of composure finally cracked. "Let's split up," he suggested, his voice tight. "You check the arcade, I'll try the pool deck." For 45 minutes, they searched independently, their paths crisscrossing the massive ship like frantic stitches trying to mend a rapidly widening tear. When they reconvened at their suite, both breathless and empty-handed, Louise's face had gone pale beneath her summer tan. "Something's wrong," she stated flatly. "This isn't like them, Robert. Even when they wander off, they always come back for food." She gestured to the wall clock, which read 5:50 p.m. "They've missed dinner." Robert reached for the suite phone. "I'm calling security." Within the hour, the Aurora Majesty's security team had launched a ship-wide search. Initially discreet, no passenger wants their vacation interrupted by emergency announcements. The operation soon escalated as each deck, each public space, each service area yielded no trace of the Winters twins. By 9 p.m., Captain Malcolm Reynolds, a veteran sailor whose 25 years at sea had prepared him for nearly every contingency except this one, made the decision to inform all passengers and crew. His deep voice resonated through the ship's announcement system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are currently conducting a search for two missing children, Noah and Ethan Winters, 12 years old, identical twin boys with blonde hair and hazel eyes, last seen wearing red t-shirts and navy shorts. If you have any information regarding their whereabouts, please contact ship security immediately." The festive atmosphere that had pervaded the vessel just hours earlier evaporated like morning mist under a harsh sun. Passengers who had been enjoying the welcome dinner or exploring the ship's amenities now formed impromptu search parties, combing every conceivable hiding place with increasingly desperate thoroughness. In the security office, Louise and Robert sat shell-shocked as Chief Security Officer James Mercer, a former naval officer whose no-nonsense demeanor was now tempered with genuine concern, reviewed the day's security footage. "We have cameras covering most public areas," Mercer explained, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he pulled up various camera feeds. "If they're still on this ship, we'll find them." "And if they're not?" Louise's question hung in the air, impossible and yet unavoidable. Mercer's hesitation lasted only a second, but it was enough to send ice through Robert's veins. "We're in open water, Mrs. Winters. The ship hasn't docked anywhere since Miami." "What are you suggesting?" Robert demanded, leaning forward in his chair. "That they somehow went overboard? That's impossible. The railings are over 4 feet high." "I'm not suggesting anything, sir," Mercer replied carefully. "I'm simply stating facts while we continue our search." He turned back to the monitors, focusing on footage from the arcade level taken shortly after departure. "There," Louise pointed, her finger trembling against the screen. "That's them." The timestamp read 1:17 p.m., less than an hour after the ship left port. The grainy footage showed Noah and Ethan, distinguishable to their mother's eye despite their identical appearance, entering the arcade. 17 minutes later, another camera caught them leaving, apparently following a ship staff member in uniform. "Who is that?" Robert asked, leaning closer. "Can you enhance the image?" Mercer tapped more keys, zooming in on the crew member, a woman in her 30s with her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. "That's Carmen Rodriguez, one of our hospitality attendants. She spoke to us on deck," Louise recalled, her voice hollow. "She told us she'd seen the boys heading to the arcade." Mercer made a note. "We'll find her immediately." But when Carmen was located and brought to the security office 30 minutes later, her confusion appeared genuine. "Yes, I saw them entering the arcade," she confirmed, her brow furrowed. "And later I mentioned this to you on deck, but I never escorted them anywhere. I had orientation duties with new staff all afternoon." "Then who is this?" Mercer demanded, pointing to the footage. Carmen studied the screen, her expression darkening. That's not possible. That looks like me, but it wasn't me." She looked up, meeting Louise's desperate gaze. "Mrs. Winters, I swear to you, I never interacted with your sons beyond seeing them at a distance." As midnight approached, and the search yielded nothing but mounting dread, Captain Reynolds made the decision that would alter the course of many lives aboard the Aurora Majesty. The ship would reverse course, returning to Miami while alerting the Coast Guard and FBI. What had begun as a family vacation had transformed into something unthinkable. The disappearance of 2 children from a vessel in the middle of the ocean, a modern maritime mystery that defied logical explanation. In their suite, Robert held Louise as she finally broke down, her sobs muffled against his chest. "Someone took them," she whispered between ragged breaths. "Someone dressed like that attendant took our boys." Robert said nothing, his mind racing through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. On the bedside table, the twins' phones lay silent, both left charging in the suite when the family boarded, a decision made to encourage the boys to unplug during their vacation. Now, those silent devices seemed to mock the parents with their uselessness. As the ship carved its return path through the dark waters, neither Louise nor Robert could have imagined how the disappearance of their sons would spawn a web of theories, accusations, and investigations that would stretch far beyond this night. Or that, 10 months later, a weathered suitcase washing ashore would reignite a case that had grown as cold as the depths of the ocean itself. Dawn broke over the Aurora Majesty as it approached Miami's port. the golden light revealing a ship transformed. What should have been the second day of a luxurious Caribbean cruise had instead become a floating crime scene, with FBI agents waiting at the dock. Passengers lined the railings, smartphones capturing the surreal scene below, news vans with satellite dishes extended skyward, police vehicles with lights silently flashing, and the grim faces of law enforcement personnel preparing to board. In their suite, Louise and Robert had not slept. Louise sat rigid at the desk, scrolling through photos of the twins on her tablet, Noah and Ethan at their last birthday, blowing out candles on identical cakes, the boys splashing in their backyard pool, Ethan concentrating intensely as he built a model airplane while Noah read a book nearby, his glasses slipping down his nose. "I keep thinking this is a nightmare," she said, her voice raw from hours of crying. "That I'll wake up and they'll be jumping on our bed, begging to go to the breakfast buffet." Robert stood by the window, watching Miami grow larger on the horizon. In the harsh morning light, he looked a decade older than his 56 years. "The FBI will find them," he said with a conviction he didn't feel. "Someone can't just disappear 2 children from a cruise ship without leaving evidence." A gentle knock interrupted their vigil. Chief Security Officer Mercer entered, accompanied by a woman whose tailored suit and alert eyes immediately identified her as law enforcement before she even produced her credentials. "Mr. and Mrs. Winters, this is Special Agent Diana Reeves, FBI Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team. She'll be taking charge of the investigation once we dock." Agent Reeves stepped forward, her handshake firm but compassionate. At 45, with short-cropped silver hair that contrasted with her smooth, brown skin, she projected an aura of competence that offered the first genuine comfort the Winters had felt since their world collapsed. "I know you've been through this with ship security," Reeves began, settling into a chair across from them. "But I need you to tell me everything again. Every detail matters, no matter how insignificant it might seem." For the next hour, Louise and Robert reconstructed their final moments with the twins, describing their behaviors, what they were wearing, and their last conversations. When they mentioned Carmen Rodriguez, Reeves made a note. "We've reviewed the security footage overnight," she said. "The woman who led your sons away was wearing a staff uniform identical to Ms. Rodriguez's, but her face is never clearly visible to the cameras. It's as if she knew exactly where the blind spots were." "Are you saying it was planned?" Robert asked, his voice tight. "That someone targeted our boys specifically?" Reeves chose her words carefully. "At this stage, we're exploring all possibilities. The ship's manifest shows over 3,000 passengers and nearly 1,000 crew members. We'll be interviewing everyone before they disembark." Louise looked up sharply. "You think they might still be on board, hidden somewhere?" "We've conducted 3 complete sweeps of the vessel," Mercer interjected gently, "including all restricted areas, maintenance corridors, and storage compartments." "Once we dock," Reeves continued, "we'll bring in specialized teams with equipment that can detect." She hesitated. "Detect what?" Robert demanded. "Hidden compartments, Mr. Winters, areas that wouldn't appear on standard ship schematics." She didn't voice the darker possibilities, that such technology could also detect human remains. Some truths were too brutal to speak aloud to parents still clinging to hope. By 10 a.m., the Aurora Majesty had docked, and the methodical process of interviewing and clearing passengers began. The Winters were escorted to a private lounge at the Port Authority building, where they were reunited with Louise's sister, Charlotte, who had driven from Orlando upon hearing the news. "We've set up a command center," Agent Reeves explained, as technicians installed computers and communication equipment around them. "By this afternoon, we'll have your son's photos and descriptions circulating nationwide." Robert nodded mechanically, staring at the coffee Charlotte had brought him but making no move to drink it. "What aren't you telling us, Agent Reeves?" Reeves exchanged a glance with her colleague, Agent Marcus Chen, before answering. "We've reviewed additional security footage from the port. There's a possibility that someone disembarked with your sons during the initial boarding confusion." "But how?" Louise demanded. "Everyone needs keycards to leave the ship." "Not necessarily during the boarding process," Chen explained. His youthful face belied 15 years of experience with missing persons cases. There was a 30-minute window when passengers were both boarding and occasionally stepping back onto the dock to wave goodbye to family or retrieve forgotten items. The security checks were primarily focused on those coming aboard, not leaving. "So you're saying our children could have been taken off the ship before it even left port?" Robert's voice rose with incredulity. "And nobody noticed two 12-year-old boys being led away. Twins in matching outfits, potentially walking willingly with an adult who appeared to be ship staff," Reeves said softly. "In a crowd of excited passengers, it might not have raised alarms." As the day progressed, the investigation expanded in multiple directions. Carmen Rodriguez underwent extensive questioning, her employment history and background scrutinized for any irregularities. Every passenger and crew member was interviewed, their statements cross-referenced with security footage to establish a comprehensive timeline. By evening, when the first national news broadcasts aired the story of the missing Winters twins, a troubling pattern had emerged. 3 different passengers reported seeing the boys with a woman in staff uniform heading toward the lower service decks, areas off-limits to guests. However, each witness described the woman slightly differently, leaving investigators uncertain whether they were pursuing one disguised individual or multiple accomplices. In the command center, now humming with activity as agents coordinated with law enforcement agencies across Florida, Louise sat with a victim's advocate, answering questions for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's database. "Noah has a small birthmark behind his right ear," she explained, her voice detached as if speaking about strangers rather than her own children. "Ethan doesn't. It's the only physical difference between them." She paused, swallowing hard. "Noah is allergic to penicillin. Ethan has mild asthma. He has an inhaler, but it was in our suite." The advocate nodded, typing notes. "What about behavioral differences? Anything that might help us identify them separately if witnesses report seeing only one child?" Louise closed her eyes, summoning the intimate knowledge only a mother possesses. "Noah is more reserved, especially with strangers. He's the planner, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Ethan is louder, more spontaneous. He makes friends instantly." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Noah would be suspicious if a stranger approached them, but Ethan might go along, especially if they said something that interested him." "And what interests them? Hobbies, favorite activities?" "They both love space, astronomy, NASA, anything about exploration. Noah is more into the science of it. Ethan loves the adventure aspect. They've been saving their allowance for one of those civilian space flights when they turn 18. Louise's voice broke on the last word, the future suddenly uncertain in ways she'd never imagined. Across the room, Robert was engaged in a more difficult conversation with Agent Reeves. "We need to discuss possibility of ransom demands," she explained. "If this was a targeted abduction rather than an opportunity crime, the kidnappers might make contact." "We're not wealthy people," Robert said, fatigue evident in every syllable. "I own a small accounting firm. Louise teaches high school biology. We live comfortably, but we're not ransom material." "Sometimes it's not about the actual wealth, but the perception," Reeves replied. "A cruise like the Aurora Majesty isn't inexpensive. To some, that might signal financial resources." "We saved for 3 years for this trip," Robert said, a bitter laugh escaping him. "It was supposed to be the vacation of a lifetime." The phrase hung in the air between them, its unintended double meaning too painful to acknowledge. As night fell over Miami, the search for Noah and Ethan Winters had expanded to include airport surveillance, border monitoring, and marina checks. Somewhere out in the gathering darkness, 2 boys who had never spent a night apart from each other or their parents were now the focus of the most intensive missing persons investigation Florida had seen in a decade. And on the 23rd floor of the Port Authority building, Louise finally asked the question she'd been avoiding all day. "Agent Reeves," she said, her voice barely audible, "what are the statistics on children who disappear from cruise ships?" Reeves met her gaze steadily. "Mrs. Winters, there are no statistics because this doesn't happen. Whatever took place on that ship yesterday was extraordinary, which means someone went to extraordinary lengths to take your sons. And that tells me they wanted them alive." It was cold comfort, but in the absence of anything else, Louise clung to it like a lifeline as another hour passed without answers. the twins' absence growing from a wound into an abyss that threatened to consume everything in its path. 2 weeks after the disappearance, the investigation had expanded into something the media dubbed Operation Twin Star, a multi-agency effort that had yielded thousands of leads, but no confirmed sightings of Noah and Ethan. The Winters had returned to their suburban Orlando home, now transformed into an impromptu command center with a rotating presence of FBI agents and local police. Louise moved through the house like a ghost, touching the twins' possessions as if they might somehow transmit messages from wherever the boys had been taken. Their bedroom remained exactly as they'd left it, beds unmade. A half-finished Lego space station sprawled across Noah's desk, Ethan's collection of model airplanes suspended from the ceiling on fishing line. Robert had thrown himself into the search with single-minded determination, taking indefinite leave from his firm to coordinate with law enforcement, organize volunteer search efforts, and maintain the social media campaigns that had made the twins' faces recognizable across the nation. Dark circles under his eyes testified to nights spent reviewing security footage, searching for anything the professionals might have missed. On this particular morning, Agent Reeves arrived with Marcus Chen, their expressions carefully neutral in a way Louise had come to recognize as the prelude to difficult news. "We need to talk about Carmen Rodriguez," Reeves began after they settled in the living room, where walls once decorated with family photos now displayed maps and timelines. "Have you found her connection to the kidnappers?" Robert asked eagerly. Despite repeated interviews and a thorough background check that revealed nothing suspicious, he remained convinced that the crew member was somehow involved. "No," Chen replied, opening his laptop. "But we've uncovered something else. Ms. Rodriguez's identity was stolen approximately 3 months before your cruise." Louise leaned forward. "What do you mean, stolen?" "Someone accessed her personal information through a data breach at the cruise line's employee portal," Reeves explained. "Credit checks show accounts opened in her name in 3 different states. More importantly, her official cruise line photograph was downloaded multiple times from an unauthorized IP address." "So the woman who took our boys, she created a disguise based on Carmen's appearance?" Robert struggled to process this information. "That level of planning suggests a sophisticated operation," Chen finished grimly. "We now believe your son's abduction was not opportunistic but targeted well in advance." "Why?" Louise's question hung in the air between them. "Why our boys?" Reeves hesitated, exchanging a glance with Chen. "We've been exploring multiple theories. One possibility is that this might be connected to one of your past cases, Mr. Winters." Robert blinked in confusion. "My cases? I'm an accountant, not a lawyer." "You've worked with several clients involved in high-profile divorces and corporate whistleblowing situations," Chen noted, consulting his notes. "Your firm handled the financial forensics for the Dawson Technologies case 3 years ago." "That was routine auditing work," Robert protested. "The SEC asked us to review their books during the investigation, but we were just doing our job." "Nevertheless, Jerome Dawson lost everything when that fraud came to light," Reeves said. "He made threats against everyone involved in his downfall." Louise shook her head vehemently. "No, if this were revenge against Robert, they would have taken him, not our children, or they would have." She couldn't complete the thought. "We're pursuing all possibilities," Reeves assured her, "including connections to your work as a science teacher, Mrs. Winters. You've been involved in several environmental activism campaigns that made powerful enemies. Local zoning disputes and a petition against a chemical plant," Louise countered. "Hardly the kind of things that lead to international kidnapping conspiracies." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Detective Maria Santos from Miami-Dade Police. Though the FBI had jurisdiction over the case, Santos had been assigned as liaison to local law enforcement and had proven herself invaluable, her tenacity and community connections generating leads that might otherwise have been overlooked. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her Bronx accent contrasting with her Miami tan. At 38, with curly black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, Santos brought an energy to the investigation that had been flagging under the weight of disappointment. "But I think I've got something." She placed her tablet on the coffee table, pulling up an image that caused Louise to gasp. It showed Noah, or possibly Ethan, walking through what appeared to be an airport terminal, accompanied by a middle-aged woman whose face was obscured by large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. Miami International, Santos explained. Taken the evening the Aurora Majesty returned to port, facial recognition picked it up during our latest sweep of transportation hubs. "That's one of my sons," Louise whispered, leaning closer. "The way he's walking, that slight inward turn of his left foot, that's Noah." "Where's Ethan?" Robert demanded, searching the image for the second boy. Santos's expression tightened. "We haven't found footage of him yet. This is from a security camera near the International Departures Terminal." "International?" Louise echoed, her voice faint. "They took him out of the country." "We don't know that for certain," Reeves cautioned. "But we've alerted Interpol and border agencies worldwide. If they attempted to use passports, fraudulent or otherwise, we'll find a trail." "Noah would never willingly leave without his brother," Robert insisted. "They've never been separated, not even for a day. Look at his face in that photo. Does he look like he's cooperating?" The agent studied the image more carefully. The boy's expression was hard to read, not obviously distressed, but not relaxed either. His posture was rigid, his free hand clenched at his side while the woman gripped his other arm just above the elbow. "He could be under duress," Chen acknowledged, "threatened or coerced." "Or drugged," Santos added grimly. "We've seen cases where child traffickers use mild sedatives to keep victims compliant in public places." Louise pressed her fingers to her lips, suppressing a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. The word traffickers hung in the air like poison gas, the possibility they had all feared but avoided naming directly. "I want to make a public appeal," she said suddenly, straightening her shoulders with renewed determination. "A press conference, television interviews, whatever it takes. Someone out there has seen my sons. Someone knows something." The agents exchanged concerned glances, but Robert nodded in agreement. "It's been 2 weeks. The media coverage is already fading. We need to put their faces back in the public eye." "We can arrange that," Reeves said carefully. "But I should warn you, once you step into that spotlight, everything about your lives becomes fair game for public scrutiny. Are you prepared for that level of exposure?" Neither Louise nor Robert hesitated. "If it brings our boys home," Louise said firmly, "they can dig through every corner of our lives." It was a brave declaration, made with the conviction of parents willing to sacrifice anything for their children. Yet none of them could have predicted how prophetic those words would prove, or how the public's fascination with the case would eventually unearth secrets buried so deeply that even the Winters themselves had forgotten they existed. The press conference was held the following morning on the front lawn of the Winters' home, where a forest of microphones stood before a podium hastily arranged by FBI public affairs officers. News vans lined the residential street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Louise had spent an hour preparing, not out of vanity, but strategic necessity. "I need to look like myself," she explained to the victim advocate who had suggested professional makeup. "The boys need to recognize their mother if they see this." Now, standing before cameras that would broadcast her plea nationwide, Louise clutched a framed photograph of Noah and Ethan taken just days before the cruise. Robert stood beside her, one hand resting supportively at the small of her back. "Noah and Ethan are the center of our world," Louise began, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "They're bright, curious boys who love space exploration, building models and making people laugh with their twin pranks. They've never spent a night apart from each other in their 12 years. She swallowed hard, fighting to maintain her composure. "To whoever has taken our sons, they need their medication. Noah has severe allergies and Ethan has asthma that can be triggered by stress. Please. They're just children. They deserve to grow up to pursue their dreams." Robert stepped forward. "We're offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to Noah and Ethan's safe return. No questions asked." It was money they didn't have, funds cobbled together from their savings and loans from family members, but the amount was irrelevant compared to what they stood to gain. Agent Reeves took over, providing the hotline number and email address established for tips. As she spoke, A reporter from a national cable network raised his hand. Mr. and Mrs. Winters, sources close to the investigation suggest your sons may have been targeted specifically rather than taken at random. Do you have any enemies who would want to hurt your family this way? Robert tensed visibly. We're ordinary people. We can't imagine anyone having this level of hatred toward us. Another reporter called out, "Is it true that you've been investigated twice by Child Protective Services?" The question landed like a physical blow. Louise's face drained of color as Robert stepped protectively closer to her. "That's completely false," he stated firmly, though a muscle twitched in his jaw, "and entirely irrelevant to finding our sons." Agent Reeves quickly intervened. "We're here to seek the public's help in locating 2 missing children, not to entertain baseless rumors. Next question, please." But the damage was done. A murmur rippled through the assembled journalists, and Louise could see them making notes, already pursuing this unexpected angle. As the press conference continued, more questions veered away from the missing twins and toward the Winters themselves. Their finances, Robert's business clients, Louise's environmental activism. When they finally retreated into the house 30 minutes later, Louise was shaking. "How did they know about the CPS investigations?" she whispered, collapsing onto the sofa. "Those records are supposed to be sealed." Robert paced the living room, fury emanating from him in almost visible waves. "Someone leaked it deliberately to undermine us, to make us look like bad parents." Agent Reeves, who had followed them inside, frowned. "You told us there was nothing in your backgrounds that could be relevant to the case." "Because it isn't relevant," Robert insisted. 10 years ago, the twins were in a car accident while my mother was driving. They had bruises that a new emergency room doctor misinterpreted. CPS investigated and cleared us completely within days. "And the second time?" Reeves pressed. Louise closed her eyes briefly. "When the boys were in 3rd grade, they went through a phase of telling elaborate stories, fantasy tales about being taken from their real parents and given to us. Their teacher reported it as a possible sign of abuse." "It was normal twin mythology," Robert added defensively. "Child psychologists see it all the time, identical twins creating shared fantasies to explain their connection. CPS interviewed them separately and determined there was nothing to investigate." Reeves made a note in her ever-present notebook. "We'll need those files unsealed officially as part of our investigation. The leak is concerning. It suggests someone with access to sealed records has an interest in this case." Outside, the media trucks showed no signs of departing. If anything, their numbers had increased, with reporters conducting stand-ups on the sidewalk and neighbors being approached for impromptu interviews. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," Detective Santos observed, watching through the window. "Once they start digging, they won't stop until they've turned over every rock in your lives." Her prediction proved accurate. By evening, the first speculative articles appeared online, questioning the Winters' parenting and suggesting alternative theories to abduction, including the possibility that the twins had run away to escape an unhappy home. "That's absurd," Louise cried, throwing her tablet aside after reading yet another baseless conjecture. "Noah and Ethan were happy. We were happy." "The media needs a narrative," Agent Chen explained gently. "When children go missing, there are typically 3 directions: stranger abduction, family abduction, or runaway. Stranger abduction is the rarest, which makes reporters skeptical. So they'd rather believe we're abusive parents, or that our 12-year-olds orchestrated their own disappearance from a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean." Robert's incredulity gave way to despondent exhaustion. "How does any of this help find our sons?" No one had an answer for him. The spotlight that Louise had hoped would illuminate the search for her children had instead cast harsh shadows across their family, creating doubts where none should exist and diverting attention from the only question that mattered. Where were Noah and Ethan Winters? Later that night, as Robert finally succumbed to sleep in the guest room, neither of them could bear to enter their own bedroom. With its view of the twins' door across the hall, Louise sat alone in the kitchen, scrolling through family photos on her phone. In the blue glow of the screen, she studied her sons' faces with the desperate intensity of a mother trying to transmit love and strength across whatever distance separated them. A soft knock at the back door startled her. Detective Santos stood on the porch, her expression grave in the security light. "I'm sorry to come by so late," she said when Louise let her in. "But I thought you should know before it hits the news tomorrow. We found something in the Cruz Marina case files that might be connected to your sons." "The Cruz Marina case?" Louise repeated, confusion momentarily displacing her exhaustion. "The drug smuggling operation from last year." Santos nodded, placing a file folder on the kitchen island between them. One of the shell companies used to launder money for the cartel made a large donation to a maritime charity 3 weeks before your cruise. The same charity that sponsored a youth education program aboard the Aurora Majesty. "What does that have to do with Noah and Ethan?" "Maybe nothing," Santos admitted, "but it creates a potential connection between organized crime and the ship your family was on." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else. The FBI hasn't shared this with me officially, but my contacts tell me they're exploring a possible connection to a child trafficking network that operates through Caribbean cruise lines." Louise gripped the counter's edge, her knuckles whitening. "Trafficking?" she repeated, the word feeling like ground glass in her throat. "For what purpose?" Santos met her gaze directly. "There's a black market for everything, Mrs. Winters, including healthy, attractive American children." The implication hung between them, too horrific to elaborate upon. Louise's mind recoiled from images she couldn't bear to contemplate. Her sons, frightened and separated, in the hands of people who saw them not as the miracle babies she'd fought so hard to bring into the world, but as commodities to be sold. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Agent Reeves hasn't mentioned any of this." "Because the FBI is playing this too cautiously," Santos replied, her voice hardening. "They're concerned about international jurisdictions and diplomatic complications, but I've worked trafficking cases before. Every hour matters." Louise studied the detective's face, recognizing the same fierce determination she felt burning in her own chest. "What do you need from me?" "Authorization to access the twins' medical records, DNA samples, and any identifying information not already in the case file. If they've been moved internationally through known trafficking channels, certain markers might help us narrow the search." Without hesitation, Louise retrieved a pen from the drawer and signed the forms Santos produced. As the detective prepared to leave, Louise caught her arm. "Detective Santos, Maria, tell me honestly, after all the cases you've worked, do you believe my sons are still alive?" Santos's expression softened slightly. "I believe that whoever took them went to extraordinary lengths to get them both. That level of planning suggests value, which in these cases—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Value typically correlates with keeping the children alive and well." It was the closest thing to hope anyone had offered Louise in weeks. Not comfort exactly, but a cold, practical assessment that nonetheless left room for the possibility of a future where her family might be whole again. After Santos departed, Louise remained at the kitchen table until dawn broke over the neighborhood, now forever changed by the media encampment that had taken root on their once quiet street. As first light filtered through the blinds, she made a decision. Opening her laptop, she began typing rapidly, drafting an email to her department chair at the high school where she taught. Her request for extended leave would be submitted that morning. The fall semester would begin without her. However long it took, wherever the search might lead, Louise Winters would not rest until she brought her children home, or until she discovered the truth that someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to conceal. The video is paused here briefly for a message from our creators. We're so glad you're enjoying this story about the Winters family and the mysterious disappearance of their twin boys. If you're finding this narrative engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel for more compelling content like this. We'd also love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on the case so far. Now let's continue with our story as the investigation takes an unexpected turn. 3 months after the twins' disappearance, the case had transformed from a national headline into something more insidious, an internet obsession. Online forums dedicated to the mystery sprouted like mushrooms after rain, populated by amateur sleuths who dissected every publicly available detail with fervor that ranged from well-meaning to disturbing. The Winters' home had become a fortress of solitude. Louise and Robert rarely ventured out, weary of being accosted by reporters, or, worse, confronted by strangers who felt entitled to share their theories about what had really happened to Noah and Ethan. On this particular afternoon, Louise sat at the dining room table with Detective Santos, reviewing a stack of tip sheets that had come through the hotline over the past week. Most would lead nowhere: psychics claiming visions of the boys on remote islands, conspiracy theorists convinced the twins had been abducted by government agents due to their special twin powers, and the inevitable cruel hoaxes from disturbed individuals seeking attention. "This one might be worth following up," Santos said, sliding a report across the table. "A flight attendant on a private charter to Venezuela remembers twin boys matching Noah and Ethan's description. The timing fits, 3 days after the cruise ship returned to port." Louise studied the report, hope and caution warring within her. They'd had promising leads before, including a gas station attendant in Key West who'd been certain he'd seen the twins with a man and woman in a silver SUV. That lead had consumed 2 weeks of investigation only to reveal a family with twin boys who were 3 years younger than Noah and Ethan and had never been on a cruise ship. "What does Agent Reeves think?" she asked, noting the FBI hadn't flagged this report for priority follow-up. Santos's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Agent Reeves has been reassigned. The FBI is scaling back their direct involvement now that the case has passed the 90-day mark." "What?" Louise set down the paper, shock rippling through her. "They can't just abandon the investigation." "They're not abandoning it," Santos clarified quickly, "but in cases without active leads or ransom demands." She trailed off, uncomfortable with the statistical realities they both understood but refused to acknowledge. "Agent Chen will remain as liaison and the case stays open, but they're transitioning primary responsibility back to local law enforcement." She hesitated, then added more gently, "Louise, you know I'm committed to finding your sons. This administrative change doesn't affect my involvement." Louise nodded mechanically, processing yet another blow in a season of unrelenting trauma. Over the past months, she had come to rely on Santos, whose determined pragmatism offered ballast against the storms of uncertainty. "Have you made any progress with the security footage?" she asked, changing the subject to something she could control. "Still working on it," Santos replied. "The enhancement team has isolated several frames where the woman's face is partially visible, but the quality isn't good enough for facial recognition." They had spent weeks reviewing and re-reviewing every second of surveillance video from the Aurora Majesty, mapping the twins' movements until they disappeared from camera view at 2:43 p.m. on the day of embarkation. The last confirmed sighting showed them following a woman in a cruise staff uniform toward a service corridor. After that, they vanished as completely as if they had walked through a portal to another dimension. The front door opened, and Robert entered, accompanied by a man Louise recognized as Brian Hoffman, their newly hired private investigator. At 50, with the weathered face of a former beat cop and the shrewd eyes of someone who had seen humanity at its worst, Hoffman had come highly recommended by other families of missing children, a specialization no parent ever hoped to need. "Ms. Santos," Hoffman acknowledged the detective with a professional nod before turning to Louise. "We've got something. A patient confidentiality waiver signed with your name at a private clinic in Bogota, Colombia, dated 6 weeks after the boys disappeared." Louise stared at him in confusion. "That's impossible. I've never been to Colombia." "Exactly," Hoffman replied, placing a document on the table. "The signature is a forgery, a good one, but definitely not yours. The clinic specializes in pediatric care for international clients. Privacy is their selling point." Santos leaned forward, instantly alert. "What kind of care?" "Routine checkups, vaccinations required for entry into European countries, and—" Hoffman hesitated, glancing at Robert. "And what?" Louise pressed. "Cosmetic procedures. Nothing major, laser treatment for birthmarks, minor dental work. The kind of alterations that wouldn't fundamentally change a child's appearance but might confuse identification efforts." A chill ran through Louise as the implications became clear. Noah's birthmark behind his ear. They took them to this clinic to remove it, to make the boys completely identical. Her voice shook with a mixture of horror and grim validation. "This proves they were targeted specifically as twins." It suggests that, yes, Santos agreed. And it means someone is using your identity to authorize medical care for children who might be Noah and Ethan. I'm going to Bogota, Louise declared immediately, already mentally cataloging what she would need to pack. We need to coordinate with Colombian authorities first, Santos cautioned. Running in without official support could spook whoever has the boys, if they're still in the country at all. I've already reached out to my contacts, Hoffman added. Former DEA with connections to Colombian police. They're trying to get access to the clinic's security footage. Robert, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. There's something else you should know. His voice was strained, his expression haunted. I received an email this morning. No text, just an image attachment. He unlocked his phone and placed it on the table. The photo showed a small boat on turquoise waters, its name clearly visible on the hull. The Winter Star. I don't understand, Louise said, looking up in confusion. What does this mean? Winter Star, Robert repeated slowly. Winters, twin stars, I think it's a message, Louise. Someone is letting us know they have the boys. Or taunting us, Hoffman suggested grimly. Have you replied? Robert shook his head. The email came from an encrypted anonymous service, untraceable according to the IT specialist I consulted. Santos took the phone, examining the image more closely. There's EXIF data embedded in digital photos, location coordinates, timestamps. Our tech team might be able to extract something useful. As she spoke, Louise's tablet chimed with an incoming email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, North Star at ProtonMail.com. With trembling fingers, she opened the message. 2 words appeared on the screen, followed by a series of numbers. They're safe. 10, 4,677 degrees N, 75, 5,276 degrees W. Coordinates, Santos said immediately, peering over Louise's shoulder. Cartagena, Colombia. North Star, Louise whispered, the pseudonym significance striking her with sudden clarity. Noah, his middle name is North, and Ethan's is. Sirius, Robert finished. After the brightest star in the night sky. His voice broke. Someone who knows our sons is sending us a message. Hoffman was already on his phone, inputting the coordinates. It's pointing to a specific building, the Antigua Trading Company, an import-export business in Cartagena's old city. A wild hope surged through Louise, nearly drowning out the voice of caution that had developed over months of disappointments. We need to go there immediately. Wait, Santos urged, her professional instincts asserting themselves. This could be a setup, if someone is using these communications to lure you to Colombia. I don't care, Louise interrupted, a steel entering her voice that brooked no argument. If there's even a 1% chance my sons are in Cartagena, I'm going. Robert nodded in agreement, already pulling up airline schedules on his phone. We can be on a flight tomorrow morning. Not alone, you're not, Hoffman stated firmly. I'm coming with you, and we're not walking in blind. My contact in Bogota can meet us in Cartagena with local support. Santos looked torn between professional protocol and human empathy. After a moment's consideration, she sighed. I have vacation days accumulated. Let me see if I can get a temporary liaison authorization to work with Colombian authorities. When Louise began to thank her, she held up a hand. Don't thank me yet. This could still be nothing, or worse, a deliberately cruel misdirection. As the others began making rapid arrangements for the journey, Louise returned to the email, studying those 2 simple words that had reignited the hope she'd been afraid to nurture. They're safe. Not the boys are safe, or your sons are safe, but they're safe, acknowledging Noah and Ethan as a unit, as the inseparable pair they had always been. Whoever had sent this message knew the twins well enough to understand their fundamental connection to each other. For the first time in 3 months, Louise allowed herself to imagine a future where she might hold her sons again, not as a distant, desperate fantasy, but as a tangible possibility within reach. That night, as she packed a small suitcase for the journey to Colombia, she included 2 items that had remained untouched since the disappearance. The twins' favorite books, dog-eared copies of The Martian that they had read aloud to each other, alternating chapters in their nearly identical voices. Whether it was maternal intuition or simply the need to believe, Louise was certain of one thing as she prepared for what might be the most important journey of her life. Noah and Ethan were alive, they were together, and someone wanted them found. Cartagena greeted them with suffocating heat and colonial splendor, its ancient fortress walls embracing a city where Spanish architecture melded with Caribbean vibrancy. Under different circumstances, Louise might have appreciated the beauty of the place, the bougainvillea cascading over balconies, the horse-drawn carriages clattering down cobblestone streets, the blue expanse of the Caribbean visible beyond the city walls. Instead, she registered only obstacles, the crowded streets that slowed their progress, the language barrier that complicated their interactions, the bureaucratic hurdles that Detective Santos navigated with increasing frustration. The local police want jurisdiction, Santos explained as their small group gathered in the hotel suite that had become their temporary headquarters. They're not convinced the email is legitimate evidence of the twins' presence here. Hoffman nodded grimly. Standard territoriality. Nobody likes Americans showing up and telling them how to conduct investigations in their own country. So what do we do? Robert asked, pacing the tiled floor with restless energy. We can't just sit here waiting for permissions. We won't, Hoffman assured him, spreading a map of the old city across the coffee table. My contact, Javier, is meeting us in an hour. He's ex-Colombian intelligence, now works private security. He can get us access to the Antigua Trading Company without official channels. Louise studied the map, memorizing the route from their hotel to the coordinates sent in the mysterious email. What exactly is this company? Import-export covers a lot of territory. On paper, they deal in handcrafted goods, textiles, ceramics, artisanal products exported primarily to North America and Europe, Santos replied, reading from her tablet. Owned by a corporation based in Panama, which itself is owned by a holding company in the Cayman Islands. Classic shell structure. Perfect cover for moving more than merchandise, Hoffman observed darkly. The implication hung in the air, unspoken, but understood by all. Human trafficking operated through seemingly legitimate businesses, hiding its victims in plain sight among commercial shipments and tourist flows. Their planning was interrupted by a knock at the door. Santos answered it, hand instinctively near the weapon she'd been required to surrender upon entering Colombia as a civilian. A hotel staff member delivered an envelope addressed simply to Winters. Robert opened it cautiously, half expecting another cryptic message. Instead, it contained a single Polaroid photograph that caused Louise to cry out in shock. The image showed Noah and Ethan, unmistakably alive and seemingly unharmed, sitting at a table with notebooks open before them. They were thinner than when they disappeared, their hair shorter and darker, but their faces, those beloved features Louise had feared she might never see again except in photographs, were vibrantly, undeniably real. This was taken recently, she whispered, her finger tracing the outline of Ethan's face on the glossy surface. Look at the newspaper on the table, it's dated last week. Santos examined the photo with professional scrutiny. The background doesn't tell us much, generic room, no windows visible, no identifying features. But they're alive, Robert said, his voice breaking on the word. And whoever has them wants us to know that. Or wants to ensure you'll pay whatever ransom they demand, Hoffman cautioned, tempering their hope with pragmatic wariness. There's no ransom demand, Louise pointed out. Just confirmation that they're safe and a location. She looked up, sudden determination hardening her features. We're not waiting for official permission. If there's even a chance my sons are in that building, I'm going there today. Javier Menendez, when he arrived an hour later, proved to be everything Hoffman had promised. Efficient, well-connected, and refreshingly straightforward. With his silver-streaked dark hair and the watchful eyes of a man accustomed to assessing threats, he brought a steadying presence to their increasingly desperate mission. The Antigua Trading Company operates from a colonial mansion in the old city, he explained, his accented English precise and measured. The building has 3 entrances, the main doors facing the street, a side entrance through an alley, and a rear access point near the loading dock. Security is present but not excessive, 2 guards at the main entrance, surveillance cameras, electronic access to restricted areas. What's our approach? Hoffman asked. Direct but cautious, Javier replied. I have arranged for us to pose as potential buyers interested in their textile exports. This gives us legitimate access to the main building. Once inside, we can assess whether there are restricted areas where children might be held. The plan was simple in theory, complicated in execution. Santos would remain outside as backup, maintaining communication via secure phones and ready to contact official authorities if necessary. Hoffman would accompany the Winters, posing as their business associate, while Javier served as translator and guide. As they prepared to leave, Santos pulled Louise aside. If you see anything at all that confirms the boys are there, you signal me immediately. Don't try to handle this yourselves. Louise nodded, though they both knew that rational agreements made in hotel rooms might dissolve in the face of maternal instinct if she came within reach of her children. The Antigua Trading Company occupied a perfectly restored colonial building, its facade painted a warm terracotta with elaborate wooden balconies overlooking the street. Inside, a central courtyard open to the sky contained a fountain surrounded by tropical plants, creating an atmosphere of tranquil prosperity. They were greeted by Elena Vasquez, the company's impeccably dressed sales director, whose professional smile revealed nothing beyond courteous interest in potential clients. "Welcome to Antigua Trading," she said in lightly accented English. "Javier tells me you're interested in our textile collections for import to Florida." Robert, drawing on years of business negotiations, slipped effortlessly into the role of interested buyer. "We're exploring options for our home decor retail chain. Authentic Colombian craftsmanship is increasingly popular with our clientele." As Alina led them through showrooms displaying intricately embroidered textiles and hand-woven hammocks, Louise scanned every doorway, every corridor, searching for any sign that might confirm her son's presence. The building was larger than it appeared from outside, with multiple wings extending from the central courtyard. "Your operation seems extensive," she observed casually. "Do you handle everything on site, manufacturing, packaging, shipping?" "The artisans work in their villages," Alina explained. "We serve primarily as aggregators and exporters. Our warehouse and shipping facilities are in the rear building." "I'd be interested in seeing your quality control process," Hoffman interjected smoothly. "If we're placing large orders, we need to understand your entire operation." Elena hesitated almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Let me check if our operations manager is available to give you a complete tour." As she stepped away to make a phone call, Javier murmured in a low voice, "Second floor, east wing. Security is tighter there, keycard access, camera coverage. Not consistent with typical export business requirements." Louise's heart raced. "How do we get up there?" "One step at a time," Hoffman cautioned. "Let's see the warehouse first. It will give us a better understanding of the building's layout." Elena returned with a man she introduced as Carlos Domingo, the operations director. Broad-shouldered and expressionless, he regarded the visitors with barely concealed suspicion. "You want to see the warehouse? Why?" "Due diligence," Robert replied smoothly. "We're potentially placing a significant order. It's standard practice to inspect facilities before committing." After a moment's consideration, Carlos nodded curtly. "Follow me, but please stay together. Some areas are restricted for insurance purposes." The warehouse occupied a separate building behind the main structure, connected by a covered walkway. As they moved through the space, Louise noted the efficiency of the operation, inventory neatly organized, workers carefully packing handcrafted items into shipping containers. "Everything appears legitimate," Hoffman murmured in her ear, his tone indicating disappointment rather than reassurance. "The second floor," Louise whispered back. "We need to find a way up there." The opportunity came unexpectedly. As they completed the warehouse tour, a young woman hurried across the courtyard, calling out to Elena in rapid Spanish. Elena excused herself to address whatever problem had arisen, leaving them momentarily with Carlos. "Would it be possible to see your administrative offices?" Robert asked. "If we're going to do business, I'd like to meet your accounting team to discuss payment terms." Carlos checked his watch. "The finance department is closed for lunch. Perhaps you could return tomorrow." He was interrupted by a sudden commotion near the main entrance, raised voices, the sound of something heavy falling. As Carlos turned toward the disturbance, Javier nodded almost imperceptibly to Hoffman. "I need to use your restroom," Louise announced abruptly. "Is there one nearby?" Carlos pointed distractedly toward the main building. "Second door on the right, past the staircase." It was the opening they needed. As Carlos moved toward the entrance to investigate the commotion, which Louise suspected Javier had somehow arranged, she slipped into the main building, past the indicated restroom, and toward the staircase leading to the second floor. Robert followed close behind, his face tight with tension. At the top of the stairs, they encountered the security feature Javier had mentioned, a door requiring keycard access. Louise's heart sank until Robert pointed to a service door several feet away, partially concealed behind a large potted plant. "Maintenance access," he whispered, "might not have the same security." The door was unlocked, whether by oversight or design, they couldn't know. It opened onto a narrow corridor that appeared to run parallel to the main hallway. Service passages, designed to allow staff to move through the building unseen by clients. They moved silently, pausing at each intersection to listen for approaching footsteps. The corridor was dim, illuminated only by emergency lighting, with numbered doors at regular intervals. "These look like residential spaces," Robert murmured, noting the small nameplates beside each door. Most displayed only numbers, but some had names, Spanish names, that meant nothing to them. At the end of the hallway, they encountered a door labeled simply "Classroom." Louise froze, her mind flashing to the Polaroid photograph. Noah and Ethan sitting at what could have been school desks, notebooks open before them. Without hesitation, she tried the handle. Locked. Robert produced a small tool from his pocket, a universal key that Hoffman had provided just in case. With trembling fingers, Louise inserted it into the lock, feeling resistance before the mechanism finally yielded. The room beyond was empty of people, but filled with evidence of recent occupation, desks arranged in neat rows, a whiteboard covered with Spanish vocabulary words, and bookshelves containing both Spanish and English texts. On the teacher's desk lay a lesson plan book, open to the current week. Louise approached it cautiously, scanning the neat handwriting until a notation caught her eye. EW and NW English Comprehension Test, 2 p.m. EW and NW, Ethan Winters and Noah Winters. "Robert," she whispered, pointing to the notation. "They're here, they're in this building." Before he could respond, a door at the far end of the classroom opened. A woman entered, early 60s, silver hair cut in a practical bob, glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She froze at the sight of the intruders, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to recognition to resignation. "Mrs. Winters," she said in a cultured British accent, "I was wondering when you'd arrive." Louise stared at the stranger who had spoken her name with such familiarity. "Who are you? Where are my sons?" "My name is Margaret Harlow. I'm the boys' tutor." She closed the door behind her, remaining near the exit. "They're not here at the moment. They've been taken to their medical appointment." "Medical appointment?" Robert demanded, stepping forward aggressively until Louise placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Nothing concerning," Margaret assured them, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to their barely contained emotion. "Routine checkups. They've both had some adjustment issues. Ethan's asthma flared up with the climate change, and Noah developed mild eczema." The casual way she discussed their son's health, as if she had every right to this intimate knowledge, sent a surge of fury through Louise. "You're talking about our children, children who were kidnapped from us. Where are they now? Who took them?" Margaret sighed, removing her glasses and polishing them methodically on the hem of her blouse. "Mrs. Winters, Mr. Winters, this situation is considerably more complicated than you've been led to believe. I understand your distress, truly I do, but there are factors at play that you aren't aware of." "Then enlighten us," Robert snapped, patience evaporating. "I'm not authorized to explain everything," Margaret replied. "But I can tell you this, your sons haven't been harmed. They've been well cared for, educated, and kept together. Their removal from the cruise ship was necessary, though perhaps executed more dramatically than I would have preferred." "Necessary?" Louise echoed incredulously. "Necessary for what?" Margaret hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "For their protection and yours." A sound from the corridor interrupted whatever explanation might have followed, footsteps approaching rapidly. Margaret tensed, moving toward the classroom door. "You need to leave, now. If you're found here, it will complicate matters tremendously." "We're not leaving without our sons," Louise stated, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "You don't understand. If you force a confrontation now, you'll put the boys at risk." Margaret reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper, thrusting it toward them. "Take this. It contains an address. Go there at 9 p.m. tonight alone, no police, no private investigators. The boys will be there, and so will the person who can explain everything." Robert took the paper reflexively, though his expression remained suspicious. "Why should we trust you?" "Because I've grown rather fond of your sons over these past months," Margaret replied with unexpected softness. "Ethan has a brilliant mind for language. Noah sees patterns in mathematics that even I miss sometimes. They deserve to go home, but safely, and with the truth intact." The footsteps outside grew louder. Margaret opened the door a crack, peering into the corridor before turning back to them with urgent intensity. "The service stairs at the end of the hall lead to a delivery entrance on the east side. Go now before security finishes their rounds." Louise hesitated, torn between the desperate need to search every room in the building and the possibility that this strange woman might actually be offering a path to her sons. "Louise," Robert said quietly, "we need to go. If the boys aren't here right now, forcing a confrontation won't help." With a reluctance that felt like physical pain, Louise allowed him to guide her toward the door Margaret had indicated. As they slipped into the corridor, the tutor called after them in a harsh whisper, "9 p.m. Come alone, for the boys' sake." They escaped the building without detection, emerging onto a side street where the oppressive heat hit them like a physical wall after the air-conditioned interior. Neither spoke until they had put several blocks between themselves and the Antigua Trading Company, the narrow streets of the old city providing anonymous shelter among tourists and locals. Finally, Louise stopped in the shade of a stone archway, leaning against the ancient wall for support as reaction set in. "They're alive, Robert. They're here in Cartagena. That woman, she's been teaching them." Robert unfolded the paper Margaret had given them, revealing an address written in precise handwriting. "Cal del Candile, 27. It's in the old city, according to the map." "We need to tell Santos and Hoffman," Louise began, reaching for her phone. "Wait," Robert caught her wrist, his expression troubled. "Margaret said to come alone. What if she's right? What if involving the authorities puts the boys at risk?" "We can't just walk into what could be a trap," Louise argued, though doubt crept into her voice. "That woman is part of whatever organization took our children." "But she seemed sincere about their welfare," Robert countered. "And she's the only solid lead we have. If we bring in Santos and the Colombian police, whoever has the twins might disappear with them again." The dilemma tore at them both. The cautious approach their guides would insist upon versus the desperate gamble that might reunite them with their sons that very night. In the end, maternal instinct won out over procedural caution. "We'll go to the address," Louise decided. "But we tell Santos and Hoffman where we're going. They can be nearby, ready to intervene if necessary." It was a compromise that satisfied neither safety nor urgency completely. But it was the best balance they could strike between the rational fear of a trap and the visceral need to reach their children as quickly as possible. As they made their way back to the hotel, Louise found herself counting the hours until 9 p.m. with the same anxious anticipation she had felt in the delivery room 12 years earlier, waiting to hold her sons for the first time. The parallels were not lost on her, both moments suspended between fear and hope, both promising a profound reunion, both fundamentally changing the course of their family's story. What she couldn't know was how drastically that story would be rewritten by what awaited them at Cal del Candile, 27, or how the truth, when finally revealed, would call into question everything she thought she knew about her sons and herself. Nightfall in Cartagena brought little relief from the heat, the ancient stones of the colonial buildings radiating warmth absorbed during the day. By 8:30 p.m., Louise and Robert had positioned themselves in a small cafe across from the address Margaret had provided, a 3-story residence with a discreet entrance and shuttered windows that revealed nothing of its interior. Detective Santos and Hoffman occupied a separate table nearby, dressed as tourists and maintaining the pretense of being unacquainted with the Winters. After heated debate, they had agreed to this arrangement, close enough to intervene if necessary but not visibly accompanying Louise and Robert to the meeting. 10 minutes, Robert murmured, checking his watch for perhaps the dozenth time in the past hour. Should we approach now? Louise nodded, her throat too constricted with anticipation to speak. They had debated endlessly about what to expect, a trap, a ransom demand, or the miracle of their sons waiting behind that weathered wooden door. Each possibility had been analyzed, contingencies planned, yet Louise knew that no amount of preparation could steel her for what might come next. They crossed the narrow street together, hands clasped so tightly that their knuckles whitened. The brass knocker on the door was shaped like a lion's head, worn smooth by generations of hands. Robert lifted it, letting it fall 3 times against the ancient wood. Seconds stretched into a full minute with no response. He was raising his hand to knock again when they heard footsteps approaching from inside. The door opened slowly, revealing a young woman in simple clothing who regarded them with wary eyes. Senora Winters. When they nodded, she stepped back. Please come in, you are expected. The interior courtyard was modest but well-maintained, potted plants, surrounding a small fountain whose gentle splashing provided the only sound in the otherwise silent space. The woman led them up a tiled staircase to the 2nd floor, where another door awaited them. Wait here, please, she instructed before disappearing back down the stairs. Louise gripped Robert's hand even tighter, her breathing shallow with tension. If they're here, if Noah and Ethan are behind that door. I know, he whispered, his own composure hanging by a thread. The door opened, revealing not their sons but a man in his 60s, tall and distinguished in appearance, with silver hair and the deeply tanned complexion of someone who had spent decades in tropical climates. His eyes, a striking pale blue, assessed them thoughtfully before he spoke. Louise, Robert, thank you for coming. His accent was difficult to place, American with undercurrents of something European. Please come in, we have much to discuss. The room beyond was a study lined with bookshelves, a desk positioned near French doors that opened onto a small balcony overlooking the street. The man gestured toward a seating area where comfortable chairs surrounded a low table. Where are our sons? Louise demanded, remaining standing. The tutor said they would be here. And they will be, the man assured her. But first, introductions are in order. My name is Dr. Thomas Clark. I'm the director of a program called Guardian, which operates under the auspices of the U.S. State Department, though you won't find it mentioned in any public records. A government program took our children? Robert's incredulity was tinged with mounting anger. That's absurd. Dr. Clark sighed, seeming genuinely regretful. Not took, Robert returned. What the hell does that mean? Louise's patience snapped. Stop talking in riddles. Where are Noah and Ethan? They're in the next room, Dr. Clark replied calmly. But before you see them, there are things you need to understand, truths that will be difficult to hear but necessary to accept if we're to resolve this situation properly. The only situation is that our sons were kidnapped, Robert stated flatly. Whatever justification you've invented doesn't change that fact. Dr. Clark studied them both for a long moment before responding. Louise, do you remember being pregnant with the twins? The question was so unexpected that Louise faltered. Of course I do. What kind of question is that? Can you describe the delivery? The hospital, the doctor's name, the complications that arose when the boys arrived 6 weeks premature. A chill ran through Louise despite the warm evening air. University Hospital in Orlando, Dr. Melissa Rienner. The boys were in NICU for 3 weeks because their lungs weren't fully developed. She narrowed her eyes. Why are you asking me things you clearly already know? Because I'm trying to understand how complete the implanted memories are, Dr. Clark replied, his tone clinical yet not unkind. The Guardian program has used memory modification techniques before, but rarely with such complex narrative construction. Memory modification, Robert echoed in disbelief. This is insane. You're suggesting our memories of our own children are fake. Not of the children themselves, Dr. Clark clarified. But of their origins, yes. Louise, Robert, Noah, and Ethan are not biologically your sons. They were placed in your care 12 years ago as part of a witness protection program unlike any that officially exists. The statement hung in the air between them, too outlandish to immediately process. Louise shook her head vehemently. That's impossible. I gave birth to them. I have the stretch marks to prove it. You had those stretch marks from a previous pregnancy. The daughter you lost to stillbirth 2 years before the twins came into your lives, Dr. Clark said gently. That genuine tragedy was incorporated into your modified memories, transformed into a successful twin birth to make the narrative more psychologically acceptable. This is ridiculous, Robert said, though a note of uncertainty had crept into his voice. We have birth certificates, medical records, photographs. All created with meticulous attention to detail, Dr. Clark confirmed. The Guardian program operates at levels of government clearance that allow for comprehensive identity creation. The boys were given to you because you were ideal candidates, a couple who had lost a child, who lived in a comfortable suburban community, who had professions that wouldn't attract undue attention. Louise sank into the nearest chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Why, she whispered, why would anyone do this? Because the boys witnessed something no child should ever see, Dr. Clark answered, his clinical demeanor softening. Their parents, their biological parents, were key witnesses in a case involving corruption at the highest levels of government and international organized crime. When they were killed despite being in conventional witness protection, the decision was made to place their 4-year-old sons with new parents who had no connection to the case. Parents who would believe the children were truly their own. That can't be. Louise struggled to articulate the protest her mind was screaming. Yet even as she rejected the narrative, fragments of memories surfaced. The twins shared fantasy about having different parents that had prompted the CPS investigation. The occasional nightmares that neither boy could fully describe upon waking. The inexplicable way they sometimes slipped into a language that sounded like gibberish but had consistent patterns like a real tongue. If what you're saying were true, Robert said slowly, why take them now after 8 years? Dr. Clark's expression darkened. Because the threat has reemerged. The organization responsible for their parents' deaths identified the boys through a fluke, a facial recognition match when your family vacation photos were uploaded to a social media platform. The cruise ship provided an opportunity for extraction before the threat could reach them. So you staged a kidnapping rather than simply telling us the truth, Robert demanded. The memory modification protocol is irreversible, Dr. Clark explained. Attempting to convince subjects of the artificial nature of specific memories typically results in psychological trauma and rejection of the information. We had to remove the boys first, then approach you with evidence that would circumvent the cognitive dissonance. Louise stood abruptly, her shock giving way to maternal fury. I don't care what you believe about our memories or some government conspiracy. I want to see my sons, now. Dr. Clark held her gaze for a long moment before nodding. They're waiting, but I should warn you they've been told the truth about their origins. It's been difficult for them to process. He crossed to a side door and opened it, gesturing someone forward. Louise's breath caught in her throat as Noah and Ethan appeared in the doorway, taller than she remembered, their blonde hair now darker with subtle auburn highlights that must have been chemically altered, but unmistakably her boys. For a suspended moment, no one moved. Then Ethan broke from his brother's side, rushing toward Louise with a strangled cry that contained equal parts relief and anguish. Mom! She caught him in her arms, the solid reality of his body against hers washing away all the theoretical debates about memory and identity. This was her son. This gangly boy with his face pressed against her shoulder was unquestionably the child she had raised, regardless of whose womb he had actually emerged from. Noah remained in the doorway, his expression more guarded, his body language tense with uncertainty. Robert approached him slowly, as one might a frightened animal. Noah, son. Is it true, Noah asked, his voice cracking with emotion, what they told us about not really being yours? I don't know what's true about how you came to us, Robert answered carefully. But I know with absolute certainty that you are my son, you and Ethan both. Something in Noah's careful composure crumbled at those words. He moved forward into his father's embrace, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For several minutes, the family reunion absorbed all their attention, the outside world and its complications temporarily suspended. It was Dr. Clark who eventually broke the spell, clearing his throat gently. I know this is overwhelming, but we need to discuss next steps. The situation remains dangerous. Louise looked up from where she sat with both boys now pressed against her sides, her arms encircling them protectively. What happens now? Are you taking them away again? That depends on several factors, Dr. Clark replied. The ideal solution would be relocation, a new identity for your entire family, a fresh start somewhere the threat can't find you. The program can provide resources, support, a transition with minimal disruption. You want us to abandon our lives, our home, our jobs, our friends? Robert asked incredulously. Would you rather abandon your sons? Dr. Clark countered. Because those are the options, Robert. The people hunting the twins won't stop. They've invested 12 years and considerable resources in finding them. Why? Louise asked, tightening her hold on the boys. What could they possibly want with them after all this time? Dr. Clark hesitated, glancing at the twins before answering carefully. Revenge is part of it, but there's something else, something their parents entrusted to them before they died. A key of sorts. A key to what? Robert pressed. To evidence that could still bring down some very powerful people, Dr. Clark replied. Information their parents encrypted and secured in a way that requires both twins to access. Noah and Ethan exchanged a look that Louise recognized immediately. The silent communication they had shared since earliest childhood, a connection that transcended ordinary sibling bonds. The lullaby, Noah said quietly. That's what it is, isn't it? The song you both remembered but we couldn't place. Ethan nodded, his expression clearing as understanding dawned. We thought it was just something we made up, but it's not random notes, it's a pattern, a code. Dr. Clark nodded. Your biological parents were cryptographers working for a government agency. They encoded critical information into a melody they taught you as a mnemonic device, knowing that even if documents were destroyed or computers seized, the information would survive in their children's memories. The revelation should have seemed far-fetched, yet to Louise, it explained so much. The twins' unusual musical abilities, their fascination with patterns and codes, the fragments of melody they would absently hum when concentrating deeply. So what happens now? She asked again. You've revealed this elaborate conspiracy theory, turned our lives upside down. Where do we go from here? That's your choice, Dr. Clark said simply. The Guardian program can offer you new identities, relocation to another country, financial support to begin again, or you can return to your old lives with all the risks that entails. Those aren't real choices, Robert protested. You're asking us to choose between our son's safety and everything else we value. Unfortunately, yes, Dr. Clark acknowledged. The world isn't always kind enough to offer perfect solutions. Noah straightened, his expression resolute despite the tear tracks still visible on his cheeks. What if we gave you the code? Would they stop looking for us then? Dr. Clark's hesitation was answer enough before he even spoke. It would diminish their motivation, certainly, but people who have invested this much effort rarely abandon their pursuit entirely. If we relocated, Louise asked, forcing herself to consider the previously unthinkable option, would the boys remain with us? No more separations. That's the plan, Dr. Clark confirmed. The initial separation was necessary only because of the immediate threat and the need to approach you with the truth in a controlled way. Louise looked at her husband, seeing in his eyes the same turmoil she felt, disbelief warring with practicality, outrage competing with protective instinct. Whatever the truth about the twins' origins, whatever deception had brought them together as a family, the reality of their bond was undeniable. These were their sons, and they would do whatever was necessary to keep them safe. We need time, Robert said finally, to absorb all this, to discuss it as a family. Dr. Clark nodded. You have until morning. I've arranged secure accommodations for tonight where you can be together without fear of immediate threat. By tomorrow, we'll need your decision. As they prepared to leave for this promised safe location, Louise found herself studying her sons with new awareness. Looking past the superficial changes to their appearance, the darker hair, the slight weight loss, she could see subtle features she had never fully registered before. The shape of Noah's eyes, different from her own or Robert's. The set of Ethan's jaw, reminiscent of neither parent. Small biological indicators of different genetic origins that had been present all along, but easily dismissed in the way all children show variations from their parents. Yet it changed nothing of what mattered. Whatever their biological beginnings, whatever strange conjunction of government conspiracy and family tragedy had brought them together, Noah and Ethan were her sons in all the ways that counted. The memories of their childhood, first steps, lost teeth, school plays, bedtime stories, those were real, regardless of whether the memory of their birth had been artificially constructed. As they left Dr. Clark's residence, emerging into the warm Cartagena night with their sons between them, Louise caught sight of Detective Santos watching from her position across the street. The detective's expression registered shock at seeing the twins, then clear relief, followed by professional curiosity about the circumstances. Louise gave a small nod, a silent message that they were safe, that explanations would come later. For now, all that mattered was that the emptiness that had haunted her for 10 months had been filled again by the presence of her children, returned to her against all odds through a confluence of mysterious circumstances she might never fully comprehend. Whatever came next, relocation, new identities, the surrendering of the life they had built, would be navigated together as a family. The truth of their beginnings might have been rewritten, but the truth of their bond remained unaltered, perhaps even strengthened by the revelation that it had formed not through biological inevitability, but through genuine connection. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Louise found herself wondering about that suitcase that had washed ashore in Florida 10 months after the disappearance. What it contained, who had sent it, and what message it had been meant to convey in this elaborate international chess game where her family had been unwitting pawns. Like so many pieces of this puzzle, its significance might never be fully revealed, becoming just another peculiar footnote in the extraordinary story of how Noah and Ethan Winters found their way home. 1 year later, the house on Lake Arenal looked nothing like their Orlando home. Nestled among the lush green hills of Costa Rica, with a view of the lake's shimmering surface and the distant volcano that had formed it, the modern structure of glass and sustainable timber offered a fresh start that had gradually become something close to happiness. Louise, now known as Laura Martinez, stood on the deck watching Noah and Ethan kayaking across the calm morning waters. At 13, they were shooting up in height, their voices deepening, their personalities evolving in the peculiar mix of independence and interdependence that characterized adolescent twins. Coffee, Robert, now Miguel, appeared beside her offering a steaming mug. Thanks, she accepted it gratefully, the familiar morning ritual one of the anchors that had helped them adjust to their new reality. The boys want to go into town this afternoon. Noah has his eye on a new telescope at the science shop. Robert nodded, leaning against the railing beside her. Their Spanish is better than mine now. They'll be translating for us soon. They already do, Louise reminded him with a small smile. Remember the plumber last week? After a comfortable silence, Robert asked the question that still arose periodically, like a stone they couldn't help turning over and examining from different angles. Do you ever regret it, leaving everything behind? Louise considered this seriously, as she always did. Sometimes I miss teaching, my students, my lab. She paused, watching as Ethan splashed water at his brother, their laughter carrying across the lake. But no, I don't regret choosing them. The transition hadn't been easy. After that night in Cartagena, they had indeed chosen the relocation option offered by the Guardian program. What followed was a whirlwind of closed-door meetings, confidentiality agreements, and crash courses in their new identities. The cover story was simple enough. Miguel Martinez, a software developer who could work remotely, had moved his family to Costa Rica for his wife Laura's research on tropical ecosystems. They had said goodbye to their old lives in stages. First, a carefully orchestrated resolution to the missing children case, a fictional discovery that the twins had been taken by a disturbed woman who believed they were her own children, now found and reunited with their family. This public narrative allowed them to return briefly to Orlando, where they sold their home, resigned from their jobs, and told friends they were relocating to help the boys recover from their ordeal. Detective Santos had been the hardest to deceive. Though not given the full truth, she had been approached by federal agents who explained enough of the situation to secure her cooperation. Her parting words to Louise had been knowing and compassionate. Families take different forms. What matters is that they're safe now. The mysterious suitcase that had washed ashore in Florida, the event that had sparked renewed interest in the case after months of inactivity, had been arranged by the Guardian program itself. A calculated move to draw attention back to the missing twins just as they were preparing to reintroduce them through the fabricated rescue narrative. Dr. Clark had explained it as controlling the information flow, ensuring that public and media attention focused where they wanted it, away from the actual events in Colombia. The suitcase had contained carefully selected items that supported the fictional resolution while revealing nothing of the truth. As for the code hidden in the twins' shared lullaby, they had indeed provided it to the Guardian program. What information it unlocked, what consequences followed for the powerful figures it implicated, remained unknown to the family. Some secrets, Dr. Clark had insisted, were safer left unrevealed. Life in Costa Rica had gradually evolved from witness protection to something approaching normalcy. The boys attended an international school where their intelligence and natural aptitude for languages helped them adapt quickly. Louise had found purpose in environmental conservation work, while Robert's software development skills translated easily to their new life. The past hadn't been entirely left behind. Sometimes the twins still had nightmares, fragments of suppressed memories from their earliest years emerging in dreams they couldn't fully articulate upon waking. A therapist affiliated with the Guardian program visited quarterly, helping all of them process the complex psychological implications of their situation. And occasionally, Dr. Clark himself would appear for brief, unannounced visits, ostensibly to check on their adjustment, but clearly also to verify their continued security. His last visit, 3 months ago, had brought cautiously optimistic news. The primary threat had diminished significantly following several high-profile arrests in European financial circles. Not eliminated completely, but reduced enough that their vigilance could be slightly relaxed. Out on the lake, the boys had abandoned their kayaks for swimming, their heads bobbing in the clear water as they challenged each other to diving contests. Watching them, Louise felt the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness mingled with profound gratitude. Whatever strange confluence of events had brought these children into her life, government conspiracy, memory modification, or the conventional birth she had once believed in, the result was undeniably precious. "They're going to want driving lessons soon," Robert observed, his tone suggesting equal parts dread and amusement at the prospect. "One challenge at a time," Louise replied, leaning into his side. "For now, let's just enjoy having them home and safe." Home, the word had taken on new meaning over the past year, no longer defined by a specific place or the familiarity of long-established routines, but by the presence of the people who mattered most. Home was watching Noah excitedly explain a new astronomical discovery at dinner. Home was Ethan's impromptu piano compositions filling the house on rainy afternoons. Home was the four of them together, navigating this extraordinary second chance they had been given. As if sensing her thoughts, Robert put his arm around her shoulders. "We did the right thing," he said quietly. "However it happened, however they came to us, they're ours." Louise nodded, the certainty in her heart unwavering despite the complicated path that had led them here. They always were. On the lake, the twins were swimming back toward shore, race forgotten, as they moved in the synchronized rhythm that had always characterized their movements. Whatever genetic code they carried, whatever mysteries lurked in their earliest memories, Noah and Ethan Winters, now known as Nicholas and Eduardo Martinez, remained what they had always been to Louise and Robert. The center of their world, the heart of their family, the children who had completed them in ways that transcended conventional understanding of parenthood. And if sometimes Louise found herself wondering about their biological parents, the cryptographers who had loved their sons enough to encode vital information in a lullaby, ensuring their legacy would survive even their deaths, she kept those thoughts private. Some questions had no answers. Some mysteries were better left unresolved. And some truths were less important than the reality they lived each day in this peaceful corner of a world that had proven both more dangerous and more wondrous than they had ever imagined. The suitcase that had washed ashore had set in motion their reunion and ultimately their new beginning. Its contents, the photograph, the baseball caps, the carefully preserved mementos, now resided in a locked box in their new home, a tangible reminder of the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this place of tentative peace. What mattered wasn't how their family had begun, but that it continued, changed by experience, strengthened by adversity, bound together not by deception or circumstance, but by the most powerful force of all. The conscious choice, made anew each day, to love each other through whatever challenges the future might hold.